everybody. Welcome back to Echoes of War. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel, joined here by my co-host, Gareth. How are you?
Hey Greg, great to be on here and looking forward to our Douglas MacArthur adventure, I'll call it.
Yeah, the continuation of the Philippines campaign. Today's actually going to be the meat and potatoes of, I'd say, the entire series. But before we jump into it, I just want to remind the audience, we are on YouTube. We're using a brand new software that makes us look much better than the previous one. Not going to pay for a Zoom account again, just saying that up front. There's going to be, I'm counting about 20 tabs open on my Google right now. A lot of maps, some pictures. And in the future, when I figure out how I'll do this, I'm probably going to put full on clips, but got to watch out for copyright stuff, of course. So please, if you can, join us on YouTube and see our ugly mugs, put, put a face to the way we sound. And also,
And
if you
if,
like to.
if you want peak depression, I sometimes wear the Toronto Maple Leafs t-shirt.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, he was last time. Uh, but before we jump into it, also, if you'd like to further support the channel, please consider checking out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is 29 episodes and ongoing at this point. You get early access to all the content I make, which I have 4 episodes coming out simultaneously. I'm actually really crunching right now. So there's a lot up there. And of course, you get voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. I just put up a poll. And despite the voting, I'm actually already making pretty much all the episodes that are on that poll because of other reasons. I had to tackle some subjects for some other projects that are ongoing. So I said, hey, got to do it. Spoiler alert, I'll just say it right here. The one that won out was an episode on why Japan surrendered. As some of you might know who listen to the Pacific War podcast week by week, I think we have 5 more episodes until that's done. We have completed the 4-year process. And the main writer who does the YouTube version of it isn't going to be making an episode looking into, kind of the big questions. So I said, hey, I got to do it. I'll make it a Patreon episode in the meantime, but I do want to give something to that audience. So I'm going to be making a few special episodes, why the
If
nukes
I'm
were
not
dropped.
mistaken, Craig, one of our very first episodes, Underrated Moments of the Pacific War Theater, we
Mhm.
actually covered the Soviet invasion of
Oh,
Manchuria.
yes. In the words of the guy who's writing the YouTube episodes, I thought this was going to be half of a script. Now I have 3 episodes dedicated to it. So he completely underestimated how large it was, because that's the issue. When he goes through the field order of battle, he was like, oh my God, it took up, like the footnotes is longer than the actual script itself, just looking at how many units, all the prestigious commanders that get dragged to the east to lead them. It's such a huge encirclement maneuver. It takes a lot of
Not
time
to
to get
mention
through.
it's now a battle-hardened and experienced Soviet army marching forward.
It's as if Muhammad Ali fought an infant. There's just not like the Japanese of the Kwangtung army are reservists, older guys, wounded guys, just guys like sent off leave. Like it's the worst that they have to face what is the
The
arguably the
best.
strongest ground forces in the world at that point. Yeah, so yeah, they got trampled, and a lot of people kind of like it's a meme that happened, but like not a lot of people have looked at how it went down, all the planning. It was very complicated. It's insane the distances the Soviets go. But yeah, that's it's coming up on the Pacific War in episode 194, which is the last one I just wrote. And then why Japan surrendered is going to be me explaining from the point of view of Emperor Hirohito. That's coming out. But I've been working on another project that's in the realm of fantasy, and I thought it'd be cool to do another one for the patrons. It's kind of just like I guess, an extra on what actually was the war strategy of Sauron during the Third Age, as if you were looking at it from like a military point of view, battlefield commander. It's a pretty interesting episode.
Okay, I'm definitely sold for that.
Yeah. So stuff is coming out behind the paywall. It's only like $2 to get this stuff, folks. So just pay the $2 for 1 month, download everything, and walk away if you want. That doesn't hurt my feelings. I make it for everybody, and it pays the animators who I have 4 projects going on right now. It's complete loss. I'm losing a lot of money doing this, but trying to pump out some content. Stating all of those updates, we're jumping into the meat and potatoes of what is the Battle for Bataan, which is actually apparently it's supposed to be pronounced Bataan, but I've my whole life it's been Bataan, so I have to pronounce it like that. I just can't get myself to do it. But I acknowledge that we're mispronouncing it, as the narrator for Kings and Generals was told a few weeks into the series, amongst other things. And I think we're going to start off by pulling up our first map. Okay, let's pull up. This guy right here is the most well-defined. Gaurav, you can see it.
Yep,
And
that's
we're,
quite a lot of unit movements.
yeah, as you can see, this is a pretty complicated one. We're going to start up north. And we're picking off from the last episode. So basically, the last episode was the initial defense of the Philippines, how it kind of just crumbled. They made delaying actions running to what is Bataan, this part of the peninsula. And now they are stuck there and they have to fight for as long as possible against the enemy. So the defenders who had made it there were supposed to have enough supplies to sustain them for 6 months. But due to our dear friend of the channel, General Douglas MacArthur, and his mishandling of the initiation of War Plan Orange 3, they had about enough supplies for 30 days.
And with more people.
Yeah, and a lot more people, about 27,000 more civilians on top of everything, too. MacArthur's forces were digging in behind what is the Abucay-Mauban line. So if you're looking at the map right now, you can see this, maybe I'm going to have to, where is it? Go down a little bit. You can see that these top lines over here are the initial defensive lines. So that's the blue, whereas the red is the Japanese, where they're going to be going. And there's actually a few formidable lines. So if you go all the way down here, the second line of defense is the Bagak-Orian line. But we'll get to that soon. But we're over here at the top of the main defensive line. Now, this line cuts across the northern end of the peninsula, as you can see. And it's flanked on either side in the middle by an extinct volcano known as Mount Netib. Now, actually, I am going to share one other map briefly because I think it doesn't look as good, but it gives you an idea of why this feature was important. So if you're looking at this map here, it shows the large mountain range. So up north, it has this big, long crest over here is Mount Netib. So basically, it's a complete natural obstacle that forces the Japanese to be diverted to either the right or the left-hand side. And then there's another mountain in the south that does basically the same thing. So this natural defense allows MacArthur and the forces to pretty much put all of their eggs in one basket that's on the right-hand side.
And also, not to mention, you can reduce your front.
Exactly. It's a very important feature. I don't want to use this map because, as everyone can see, it's a little old and not very distinctive. But we're going to go back to my other map. Over here. So this one has all the units. So yeah, that natural feature is going to do a lot of work for them. So now we have General Homa, who's coming into this. He's going to be approaching the mouth of the Bataan Peninsula, marking the beginning of the Battle of Bataan. MacArthur assigned our other dear friend who gets really screwed in this, Wainwright, to command the western half of the Bataan defenses. Following their chaotic and heroic battles over the Aegean Gulf, Wainwright's men were not in any condition for immediate action. Regardless, he was given command of the 1st Corps, which comprised 4 divisions and a regiment of the Philippine Scouts. His defensive line stretched from Mauban on the coast to Mount Silanganan, which is a range. Now, it seemed likely that the Japanese would begin their assault from the eastern side along the coastal highway, a sector that MacArthur assigned to Major General George Parker. Parker was commanding 25,000 men of the 2nd Corps, consisting of 4 divisions, and also a regiment of Philippine Scouts. These units had just escaped from the southern part of the Philippines on Luzon with relative ease, and they were, much more fresh for combat. His defensive line extended from the foothills of Mount Netib all the way to Mabatang on the part of Manila Bay, just in front of Abucay. The eastern coast was terrain-wise really flat and swampy. There's rice paddies and such, little ponds everywhere. And this extends for about 2 miles. Many of the frontline troops were elite Filipino units determined to redeem their earlier poor performance during the fight for the Aegean Gulf. MacArthur's strategy aimed for a defense in depth, taking full advantage of the rugged terrain. He established entrenched defensive positions in the jungles and the mountains. However, a significant oversight on his part was the large gap at the center of the defensive line, that being on Mount Netib. So if we're looking over here, you can see right in the middle Mount Natib, and it encompasses quite a large area, but it only gets, as steep as you get to the middle part of it. So there are parts that you can kind of cross. And this is a big oversight, actually, for the Allies. He had established entrenched defensive positions in the jungles and mountains, as I said. However, he assumed Mount Natib was impassable. So he made the error of not really putting too much defenses in that area on either side of it. So this forms these gaps, you see. If any Japanese forces managed to traverse said gaps, the consequences would be disastrous to his defensive line. It was actually a scenario reminiscent, if you think back to the Battle for France, so the battle for the Maginot Line, when the French believed their fortifications would repel any attacks, but the Germans circumvented the Maginot Line by going through, the Ardennes Forest, which was deemed impassable, of course.
And the column was detected.
Yep. MacArthur also formed a rear battle position stretching from Bagac to Oriane. So I'm just going to go south here. So you can see this large blue line going back and forth. That's going to be their fallback position. Sorry for moving this so much. And by this stage of the campaign, MacArthur had already lost around 13,000 men, whereas Homa had incurred about 2,000 casualties. However, Homa encountered a significant setback due to a decision made by his own command. As we mentioned in the previous episode, his most elite division, the 48th, had been redirected for the incoming attack on the Dutch East Indies. This maneuver had been interpreted as a miscalculation on part of the Japanese commanders, as they underestimated the strength of they were underestimating the strength of defenses in Bataan and Corregidor. Yet it may have also been a tactical choice. The Japanese senior commanders likely believed that they could afford to disregard MacArthur's forces held up in Bataan and, just let them wither on the vine. It's basically a siege situation. The Dutch East Indies, with their vast oil reserves, was the literal strategic objective of pretty much this entire war. So it was much more prudent to go and attack that. So the 48th Division is replaced by the 65th Summer Brigade, a brigade from Formosa, which was basically just like a garrison force of 7,700 men, comprised of older soldiers, pretty under-equipped, pretty unprepared, not front-line of duty guys. And they're about to hit the front lines. So an interesting development occurs in the background. On January the 13th, Emperor Hirohito was closely monitoring the campaign from a war room situated beneath his imperial palace. He made his first direct intervention into the Pacific War's management, urging General Sugiyama, who was at that time the Army Chief of Staff, to reinforce the troops in the Philippines and to expedite the capture of Bataan. A week later, Hirohito reiterated his request for additional reinforcements, although Sugiyama pointed out that with the American forces balled up in Bataan, there really was no immediate danger. Nonetheless, Sugiyama assured the emperor that fresh troops would be sought out. Hirohito followed up again on February the 9th and the 26th, and I just wanted to bring this up to illustrate a point that prior to what a lot of people believe about the emperor, he was very involved into even the day-to-day basis of the war, and he was making decisions. Now, on January the 9th, Japanese forces under Lieutenant General Susumu Moyaka began probing attacks on the eastern end of the Abucay line. This would escalate into heavier fighting. The defenders fought tenaciously, repelling the initial assaults, showcasing remarkable valor, particularly amongst the Filipino troops. However, over on the western Mauban line, despite the ferocious counterattacks from the 51st Philippine Division, the Japanese managed to breach the defensive positions. On January the 12th, amidst intense fighting, 2nd Lieutenant Alexander Ninger, a platoon leader in the 57th Infantry, made the ultimate sacrifice, armed only with his rifle and hand grenades, as he charged into the Japanese foxholes, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. And he led his units to reclaim the Abucay Hacienda, a fortified position on the Abucay line, and was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his courageous actions. Now, another outstanding act of valor came from a Filipino soldier named Narcisco Orteliano. During a banzai charge, he used a water-cooled heavy machine gun to fend off dozens of Japanese soldiers after his machine gun jammed. Then he switched to his Colt .45 revolver, and he managed to shoot 5 more attackers. When one tried to bayonet him, he frantically grabbed the soldier's rifle, losing his thumb in the process. but he managed to turn the weapon back on him and he stabbed him in the chest with said bayonet. Another soldier attempted to bayonet him
That
as
that's
well.
quite a that's quite a counterattack.
Yeah, exactly. And he adeptly turned the soldier's rifle back on him and he shot him dead. Francisco received the Distinguished Service Cross for his gallant actions, earning him the nickname the Rambo of Bataan. Beginning on January the 5th, MacArthur placed his troops in Bataan on half rations. In reality, they were subsisting on about 1,000 to 1,500 calories per day. By contrast, MacArthur and his contingent on Corregidor Island had far more adequate food supplies, sufficient to sustain 7,000 men for 6 months within the Malinta tunnels that they were hiding in. While life in these tunnels had been safer, it was far from pleasant. On January the 9th, one officer known as Pick Diller noted, "Suddenly the lights went out. The tunnel wall began to shake. Japs were dropping 1,000-pound bombs. The air inside the tunnel pressed against our lungs. More bombs fell, and the detonations reverberated louder in the tunnel than outside. Nurses began mumbling prayers." Afterwards, Diller and the other officers discussed when the expected convoy might arrive, as MacArthur was telling them that, rescue was on the way. One officer named Romulo quietly informed those around him that he had insider knowledge. He said this: "The convoy is very near and may be here in a week's time, but keep that under your hat." The sentiment was largely due to MacArthur's empty promises about relief forces being on way, despite the fact, as we have already mentioned, Rainbow Plan 5, thankfully, it was a Europe first strategy. There was going to be no rescue effort for the Philippines until late 1944, 1945. On
I
January
think
the
if I'm not
15th.
mistaken, they wanted to deploy all the assets to Europe, and it was only folks like Admiral King who were trying to push back, saying if we have idle
Yep.
assets in the European theater, we deploy them in the Pacific.
What's funny is a lot of people hate Admiral King, yet he was one of the guys champion getting resources to the Pacific. It's very bizarre how authors treated Ernest King. uh, yeah. On January the 15th, MacArthur addressed his troops. He had this to say: "Help is on the way from the United States. Thousands of troops and hundreds of planes are being dispatched. No further retreat is possible. We have more troops in Bataan than the Japanese have thrown against us. Our supplies are ample. A determined defense will defeat the enemy's attack. I call upon every soldier in Bataan to fight in his assigned position, resisting every attack. This is the only road to salvation. If we fight, we will win. If we retreat, we will be destroyed." So,
I mean,
it's a little saber rattling.
well, they literally don't have anywhere else to go.
Yeah. It's
And
not as if they
he's
have a choice.
correct. There are thousands of troops and aircrafts on their way from the United States, just not in his direction.
Yeah. Even President Quezon appeared unaware of the reality of the situation. When it finally dawned on him that the Philippines might be completely abandoned, the furious president and his cabinet demanded, an immediate, he demanded immediate independence from the United States, which he thought, might see his country spared if he declared neutrality, but there was just no chance of that at this point. MacArthur offered some support to Quezon's demands, which were forwarded to Washington, but they were rejected. Disheartened, Quezon was approached by the vice president, Sergio Osmiena, who warned him that if they returned to Manila, Quezon's daughter could be at risk of being raped by Japanese soldiers. Quezon responded, "Compadre, perhaps you are right. I shall think it over." And he never raised the issue of neutrality again. I mean, I think he understood that they were in it no matter what at this point. There was no salvation to be had. Around the same time, MacArthur
I mean,
retrieved.
they are friends, right, of the
Yeah,
Japanese Empire.
yeah, the Japanese Empire, who's like, "Hey, you're part of the greater co-prosperity sphere," and then the leadership in the Philippines is like, "We didn't know that."
It almost feels like how ancient Rome considered friends.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Around the same time, MacArthur retrieved an old double-barreled Remington Derringer pistol from his belongings and he strapped it to his side, telling his naval advisor, Colonel Sidney Huff, "Sid, they will never take me alive." It's like, okay. Man, MacArthur and the
I mean,
dramatics.
sorry, it's just like pistols and an American general. There's only one answer:
Yeah.
Patton.
And again, I've said this multiple times. You know, I shit on MacArthur a lot, but I would never question him being brave or not. He was a brave guy. He definitely did a lot of shit in his day, especially during like World War One, and even during this time, he put himself in harm's way. He would go outside all the time during bombings and stuff. He was undeniably a brave guy, and you know, I think he would fight to the end if he was put in that situation, but he was not going to be. We'll say that much.
Fair enough.
I'll also bring up a rather famous instance. Many people who know about the story of the Battle of Bataan probably have heard the infamous "Dugout Doug" song. And here, I actually have a tab opened with it of the song itself. Here we go. Let's leave it in the background. So the song's premise was that the forces defending Bataan had recalled only a single instant when MacArthur actually visited the front lines. So because of this, he had earned amongst them the nickname Dugout Doug, because he was being perceived to spend his entire time hiding in La Malinta tunnels over in Corregidor, while the troops at the front were facing sheer death. However, as I had mentioned, even other historians have written, you know, Corregidor was bombed to shit most of his campaign. And MacArthur would often go outside and expose himself to the enemy bombings, and people said it was to the point of recklessness. So I wouldn't say he wasn't brave. I just think as a commander, I don't know why he chose not to visit the front lines more often. He should have,
It's
but
it's kind of like how General Savage of the Australian Army was. Like
yeah.
he went to the front. At least MacArthur is more willing to go to the front than Admiral Gormley.
Yes, definitely. But Admiral, I mean, that on a spectrum, Admiral Gormley is never getting out of that office. He's too much paperwork he has to do. But MacArthur's, you know, promises of relief forces never convinced the American troops. They understood the logistics and the forces that would be needed to rescue Bataan. They knew it was impossible. So they felt that MacArthur was basically trying to deceive them. So as you can see here, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's a jab at MacArthur. This song. Here, I'm just gonna pull back up the map from before. There we go. Okay. Now, meanwhile, on the Japanese side, General Nada's underarmed troops, that 65th Summer Brigade, who were intended to garrison the Philippines after everything was done, well, they had to replace the crack 48th Division, and they, you know, who had just been redirected to the Dutch East Indies. Now, at the War College, Nara had cautioned against attacking without accurate maps. Although he possessed a road map and several large-scale maps, now he lacked a cohesive attack plan. He received orders from the 14th Army that simply stated, pursue the enemy in a column down the highway over on the eastern side here. And he would be supported by two artillery regiments, the 9th and 16th Divisions. Nair had been informed that there would be no more than 25,000 disorganized enemy troops in Bataan. Likely, we're going to just retreat to the small town of Medivales at the first sign of gunfire. They were expected to make a brief stand, you know, to show that they were defending themselves and then try to escape to Corregidor. Nonetheless, Nara requested a preliminary survey to know what he was attacking, because he's a responsible commander. Nara hastily devised a plan, taking only 1 day to organize. Very fast. He instructed his 141st Infantry under Colonel Takeo Imai to advance straight down the coastal highway, while the 9th Division, commanded by his trusted friend Colonel Suzumu Tagichi, was to march down the peninsula towards the slopes of Mount Natib. I just want to make sure I have this over here. So I don't know if you can see my cursors, but you were looking at the northeastern part of the map, and you can see these two red lines going down. This is his forces. Now, Nara directed Takichi to cross what was believed to be an impassable mountain, and then to cut back to the coastal highway, effectively surrounding the enemy. After an hour-long artillery bombardment, Imai and the 141st began their advance down the highway, while Takichi and the 9th entered the dense jungle. Imai's forces had scarcely covered 100 yards when the road erupted with thunderous roars. General Parker's 41st and 51st Divisions, along with the elite 57th Philippine Scouts, unleashed a devastating artillery barrage upon them. The defenders, both American and Filipino, were exhibiting unwavering determination to hold them back. For nearly 48 hours, the defenders' artillery decimated Omai's regiment, reducing their strength to about a third. Nara had to replace them with remnants of his reserve units, and, well, his troubles were just beginning. Nara received no communications from Takechi, who should have already crossed Mount Netib and encircled the enemy by that point. It seemed as if the jungle had just swallowed him up. So Nara refrained from reporting this back to Homa or documenting it in his war diary, opting instead to protect his old comrade. Nara's ambitious plan looked like it was collapsing, compelling him to redirect efforts towards rebuilding his defensive lines. By January the 13th, he had repositioned Omai's battered forces westward to fill in the gap created by Takechi's absence. Then he resumed probing attacks to identify weaknesses along the Abucay line. Now, on that same day, Quezon had sent a radiogram to Roosevelt through MacArthur expressing dissatisfaction with the president's failure to fulfill his pledge to send aid to the Philippines, which, I mean, come on, like, I don't know what FDR could possibly do at this point. He urged FDR to direct the full force of the U.S. military power against the Japanese immediately. His indignation was conveyed in a note to MacArthur, which stated this: "Has it already been decided in Washington that the Philippine front holds no significance for the final results of the war, and therefore no help can be expected here in the immediate future, or at least until our capacity to resist is fully exhausted? If so, I need to know, as I have a responsibility to my countrymen. I wish to determine whether it's justifiable to allow these men to be killed when their bloody may be shed unnecessarily for the ultimate outcome of the war. It appears Washington does not fully grasp our situation or the feelings of neglect regarding our safety and welfare that are brewing amongst our people here." To this, MacArthur reiterated his earlier statements, such as the ones on January the 15th, promising that U.S. aid was on its way indeed, although he was just lying. The Filipino troops, however...
I guess I'm pretty sure he was not aware of the conferences that are going on between the British and American High Command.
I mean, he doesn't need to be made aware because he's been part of like the war planning for a long time at this point. So he knew full well what was going down. He was just lying. And he wasn't pulling the wool over the eyes of the American soldiers, but the Filipino troops found some inspiration and, maybe some belief that there was salvation to be had. On the morning of January the 16th, the 51st Philippine Division launched a counterattack. And they were so eager that one regiment outpaced the flanking units. This presented Colonel Amai with an opportunity that he needed. He launched an attack on the eastern end of the bulge formed by the Filipino defenders. Simultaneously, Colonel Takechi's lost regiment suddenly emerged from the jungle slopes, striking from the opposite side of the bulge. Caught in a vice, the Filipino defenders were overwhelmed and they collapsed by noon, leaving a 2-mile gap in the Abucay line. Now, later in the afternoon, Takechi was very exhausted after his trek through the jungle. Found with his uniform in complete tatters, reported to Nara about how his force had become hopelessly lost while attempting to navigate around Mount Netib. Nara ordered him to shift into the reserves, attempting to support his friend again by providing him rest and recovery. Takechi saluted and without delay led his forces back into the jungle, viewing Nara's suggestion as punishment for losing his way. So he was determined to take his men over Mount Netib or die trying. Very Japanese. Pretty stereotypical.
I was like, all right, you guys, it's fine. I understand you had a hard time. Just go recover. They're like, nope, we're going to fight.
Yeah.
And die.
And on the opposite side of Mount Netib, towards the South China Sea, the terrain was impenetrable, so much so that Homa had struggled to mount a meaningful offensive there. Yet late on January the 16th, 5,000 Japanese troops under Major General Naoki Kimura, positioned opposite a Wainwright's defensive line, discovered that the U.S. defenses reached only halfway up the western slope of Mount Silaganan. This is about 2 miles west of Mount Netib. Just trying to see on our map, does it show? Doesn't really show it, but you just have to imagine it's a little bit further to the west there.
So it's kind of like, I guess, closer to where it's written Bataan Peak.
Yeah, exactly. Kimura resolved to achieve what Takechi had failed to do, approaching the western flank. He dispatched Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Nakanishi with 700 infantry to secretly maneuver around Wainwright's right flank and then turp sharply west. It went all according to plan. If it all went according to plan, they could reach the South China Sea, thereby cutting off Wainwright. By January the 16th, the 122nd Regiment moved south towards Marong, where their advance was halted by the 26th Cavalry Regiment, largely composed of Philippine scouts. One Lieutenant Edwin P. Ramsey eagerly joined the 26th Cavalry Regiment in the Philippines back in 1941, and he recalled, "I didn't even know where it was, except that it was a warm country, tropical, that they had a good polo team over there." Sounds like the average soldier. On January the 16th, Lieutenant Ramsey ordered the last cavalry charge in American history at the village of Morong. Despite being heavily outnumbered, outmatched by infantry supported by tanks, the cavalry charge surprised the Japanese, causing them to break and flee. Ramsey and his men maintained their position under fire for about 5 hours until reinforcements arrived. For his bravery, Ramsey received a Silver Star and a Purple Heart. Despite the success of the cavalry charge, General Wainwright had no option but to withdraw his forces on the 17th. As he noted, due to a lack of food, they would end up butchering their mounts to survive, converting them into 2 squadrons, one motorized rifle squadron and one mechanized squadron. Now, back over in the east on the Abucay line, MacArthur dispatched the Philippine Division and his remaining reserves to plug the gap caused by the 51st Division's blunder. If this position fell, the entire main battle line would collapse in an instant. And I think at this point, I'm just going to slightly go a bit down on the map. There we go. The 51st Philippine Division launched a counterattack, but in their eagerness, many troops advanced far ahead of their supporting units, creating vulnerabilities on their flanks. Colonel Limay capitalized on this opportunity, breaking through and creating a 2-mile gap, and that's in the Salian River Valley, which is part of the Abucay line. Now, in response to the devastation of the 51st Division, General MacArthur was forced to deploy his last Philippine reserves to try and halt the Japanese advance before it was too late. As they moved towards the Salian River Valley, the 21st Division managed to rush to the scene and repel the invaders before they could gain a foothold. Meanwhile, to the west, another Japanese force, the 65th Division under General Nara, comprised of understrength troops intended for just garrison duties, penetrated the Abucay line, advancing into what is known as the Abu Valley. I want to see, is that on this map? Yeah, the Abu Valley is right there. Okay. Though the Philippine scouts attempted to halt their progress, the 65th Division soon received reinforcements from the Japanese 9th Regiment. Eventually, General Parker's efforts to deploy parts of the 12th, 51st, and 31st Divisions began to pay off, as a series of attacks and counterattacks helped stabilize the front somewhat. However, holding back the enemy was one thing. Successfully repulsing them was quite another. After evaluating the deteriorating conditions along the line, Lieutenant General Sutherland recommended a withdrawal to the Bagac-Orian line, which stretches between the towns of Bagac and Orian. So if we're going back to this map, we're just going to go a little bit south. You can see the definitive blue line. And here is going to be, again, kind of the meat and potatoes of the Battle of Bataan is this line right here. It's going to stand pretty long. So this brings us to what is called the Battle of the Bagac-Orian line. The withdrawal came just in time, as one of Major General Nakioka Kimura's detachments managed to outflank General Wainwright's western lines along the slopes of Mount Natib. Wainwright attempted a personal tank assault to breach the Japanese road blockade, but he was unsuccessful. By the 21st, the Mauban line had been breached, and Wainwright's 1st Division found itself rapidly being encircled. Consequently, he and his men were forced to abandon their vehicles and artillery pieces, retreating south via the beach. The Mauban line was left behind, and a general retreat began southwards.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself?
Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, Season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/The Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
Meanwhile, MacArthur started sending some messages to Washington regarding the defeats and the withdrawals, characterizing them as a coordinated amount of maneuvers. He stated, "Under the cover of darkness, I broke contact with the enemy, and without a loss of a man or an ounce of material, I am now firmly established on my main battle position. The execution of the movement would have done credit to the best troops in the world."
So great propaganda from the PR team.
Yeah, it's basically like what looks like a loss of my first defensive line is actually, I planned this all along, of course. Yeah. But, generals will be generals. All right, and at the same time, an intelligence officer of the 16th Naval District, Lieutenant Commander Cheek, sent a different report to Washington, and this is what it said. "Panic spread through the 53rd Regiment and even to the reserve 52nd Regiment, a mile behind the front. Machine guns, rifles, ammunition, and equipment were abandoned, with some turning their weapons on the disorganized 51st Division." So we got two very different reports coming in.
I'm pretty sure this is just going to fuel MacArthur's distrust of the United States Navy.
Exactly. Yeah, the Navy is his real enemy. Despite MacArthur's, we'll call it optimistic narrative, Commander Cheek met with the U.S. Army colonel, confirming that about 40% of the Philippine Army divisions had been lost to desertion at this point. Many had abandoned artillery pieces, scores of machine guns, thousands of rifles, vast amounts of munitions and supplies, which they didn't have a lot of, by the way. For the retreating soldiers, chaos did reign. Thousands were separated from their units, and they arrived haphazardly behind the new defensive lines. Fortunately, there was little activity from the enemy in terms of aircraft, which could have really done a lot of damage to them as they were all exposed running across the roads. By January the 26th, all the forces were safely positioned behind pillboxes, trenches, and bunkers along the Bagak-Orian line, with supplies effectively being resupplied via footpaths through the jungle. Both American and Filipino forces were acutely aware that they retreated into a peninsula that might become their tomb. Now, just to reiterate, MacArthur's insistence on stopping the invaders at the beaches back at the beginning of this cost them valuable time. In the rushed efforts to enact War Plan Orange 3, the Army had failed to transport all the available ammunition, your medical supplies, all your food, war materials to Bataan. They were already on half rations. And those witnessing the retreat described their comrades as, quote, "the walking dead, unwashed and unshaven for 9 days, with gaunt faces blank." They were now in the same precarious position as before, further south, with both the eastern and western flanks separated by Mount Natib. It's like kind of rinse and repeat. Wainwright would command the western sector again, while Parker retained command of the eastern sector. The troops resisting in their foxholes and dugouts thanked their lucky stars that they had survived the intense retreat from the Abucay-Mauban lines. They probably should have held it longer, though. Lieutenant General G. Lee of the Philippine Division composed a poem about the withdrawal. And it goes something like this. "Saved for another day, saved for hunger and wounds and heat, for slow exhaustion and grim retreat, for a wasted hope and sure defeat." It's pretty dark and gloomy to write that while defending, but yeah. Some of the Japanese forces were also in quite a difficult position. Nara's 65th Summer Brigade, again supposed to be just garrison units, suffered over 2,000 casualties, and the survivors were quite exhausted, pretty shell shocked from their first taste of real battle. Now, before we continue, I do have another map, but I think I'm going to leave it for a while. It's not as well detailed as this one. This one simply is one of the best maps I found. On the night of January the 22nd, Generals Wainwright and Parker initiated a hazardous withdrawal from the Abucay-Mauban lines, as we described. Meanwhile, Douglas MacArthur was trying to assure Washington, that everything was hunky-dory, but it wasn't. It was anything but. Just to give you an idea, some sailors during this were asking when being handed weapons, "Hey, Sarge, how do you get bullets into these things?" Basically, the Navy men were being thrown onto the front lines. And it's actually a funny part about this. Some of the untrained sailors, when they were given guns, because of their lack of appropriate uniforms, they took coffee and they rubbed it against to kind of like blacken it up a bit, because it wouldn't make much sense to be out in white. But so now sailors are getting thrown onto the front lines.
Honestly, it just kind of sounds like how the Russian Second Pacific Squadron sailors were in their training.
Yeah. So after about just 4 days, a new defensive line was, of course, established between the coastal towns of Oran and Bagak. On the 26th, the line was, fully in preparation, had all the things they needed, the fill boxes, trenches, resupply routes that go through the jungles. And, the men were ready to face the Japanese again. Now, General Naro's 65th Brigade advanced eastward, and General Kimura's forces moved along the western flank. However, General Homa had a hidden advantage. He planned an amphibious landing to bypass the defensive lines. Barge landings on the rugged western coast, well behind the Bagak-Orion line, aimed to capture the southern naval base at Marivel, effectively cutting supplies from Corregidor. So if we're going over here to the line, you can look up all the way on the western side. You can see these amphibious landings coming over here. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. Now, over the next 2 weeks, 5 separate landings would be attempted. The first one took place on the evening of January the 22nd, with landing craft departing from Barong, heading towards Kaibobo Point, just south of Bagak. I'm trying to see if that... Yeah, okay, that's on the map. Good. Homa may have acted a little prematurely. Lieutenant General Masami Maeda, Homa's chief of staff, cautioned that if MacArthur discovered any of these landings, he could potentially break through the Japanese lines. Maeda recommended they simply blockade Bataan while the rest of the archipelago was occupied, reasoning that by that time MacArthur's men would have probably been starved out and they would be ready to surrender. While Maeda presented a compelling case, Homa deemed this unacceptable to, forego what could be a faster victory. To Homa, Tokyo could not allow such a perceived loss of face. Nevertheless, to execute the plans, Homa swallowed his pride.
But if I'm not mistaken, he's already lost a lot of face to Tokyo.
Oh yeah, he's being dramatically shit on. He's taking too long in their view because they had a strict timetable, but they also took away the units he needed to do the job, which is kind of sad. And no one likes him in Tokyo. And I think in the previous episode I mentioned he was called, or his nickname was the Poet General. He was, I don't know what you want to call him, an Anglophile. He liked Anglos, and he had a lot of experience overseas, and he was seen to be a little bit too gentle.
Too nice.
Yeah, he wanted to fight a gentleman's war, and this was not happening. Like, none of the Japanese commanders wanted to fight a gentleman's war in the Pacific. It was not like that.
Did he? I think you're probably aware, Craig, but maybe for the audience, quite a few of his command staff were under the influence of how you call the most hated man of World War II.
Yep.
Tsuji Masanobu.
Yeah. It's surprising how a guy who wasn't a very high-ranking figure had such a massive impact on the overall war. Like, yeah, he's a terrible human being. And yeah, Homa, much like General Yamashita, but I think more so because General Yamashita, I would say he wasn't guilty of a lot of things that he did, but he was a cutthroat. He was a brutal guy too.
He was, but I guess maybe at least Yamashita was already very well known in comparison to general public.
Yes. And Yamashita was hated for a completely different reason. He went against Tojo. So Tojo basically used the entire Tosai faction to just shit on him. That's actually something I'm writing about right now, too, in the background. So interesting. Politics in the Japanese military this time is very interesting stuff.
Well, I mean, I'll just say this: both technically commanded armies at this time, but Yamashita at least would get an area army by the end of the war.
Yeah, yeah. Yamashita got dealt a bad hand of cards at the end, though. It's funny. He was like the guy that everyone hated, yet he was given like one of the most important missions. But yeah, a telegram actually arrived to Homa from Tokyo, prompting some tears to fill in his eyes as he read it. Tojo expressed disappointment. Victories have been recorded throughout the war in all of the other theaters, except for the Philippines. Homa apparently fainted upon reading this news, and he had to be carried out of the room. And I would believe that quote. He was known to be pretty. I mean, he was a drama guy too. He did drama, but he was a pretty emotional guy. Now, back on Corregidor, President Quezon listened furiously to Roosevelt on the radio, who stated that thousands of aircraft would soon be dispatched to the battlefield, Europe. That must have really sucked.
It's kind of like saying I'm dispatching the battle like assets, but how you have the investment documents with the asterisks that terms and conditions apply.
Yeah,
It's pretty
exactly.
much that.
Quezon actually was seen to exclaim, "For 30 years I have worked and hoped for my people. Now they burn and die for a flag that could not protect them. Por Dios y a todos los santos." I apologize for my Spanish. "I cannot stand this constant reference to England, to Europe. Where are the planes this Civiganza, scoundrel in English, is boasting about? How American is this wrath and anguish for a distant cousin while a daughter is being raped in the back room?" That's a big quote. Jeez. Yeah.
Damn.
Quezon, he summoned his cabinet and he expressed his intention to request from Roosevelt that the Philippines become independent again, allowing, for neutrality and leaving the Americas. But again, as we discussed, this was not going to do anything. The Japanese.
It's past the point that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and MacArthur, he was in a rock and a hard place because he's very good personal friends with Quezon, and he's kind of trying to defend him as well. And he sends his own requests, to Washington, but FDR, rejects a lot of these requests and says, we can't possibly do this. So yeah, it's not looking good, to say the least. But at one point, in kind of a masterful diplomatic move, he writes to Quezon, "So long as the flag of the United States flies on Filipino soil, it will be defended by our own men to the death. Whatever happens to the present American garrison, we shall not relax our efforts until the forces which are now marshaling outside the Philippines return to the Philippines and drive out the last remnants of the invaders from your soil." So FDR is trying to, put a little saving grace on this. And apparently Quezon was a little bit overwhelmed by the words. And, he swore to himself that he would stand by America regardless of the consequences for his people or himself. And I mean, he doesn't really have a choice. The Japanese are going to conquer the Philippines, and it's going to be brutal, absolutely brutal on the Filipino people. It's a horrible time for them. And mind you, I'm going to just say this for anybody who's, a Filipino member of the audience. Let's acknowledge the Americans were also very bad to the Filipino people well before this. I think the Japanese were worse, but, it's not good for them nonetheless. But this account comes from, I have some notes here from a book it's an older one. It's a little bit it's pretty famous. It's The Rising Sun by John Toland. It's a staple amongst Pacific War literature, where he followed up a message that went to MacArthur. "The duty and necessity of resisting the Japanese aggression to the last transcends in importance any other obligation now facing us in the Philippines. I particularly request that you proceed rapidly to the organization of your forces and your defenses to make your resistance as effective as circumstances will permit and as prolonged as humanly possible." So MacArthur's been given some pretty bombastic orders. The Philippines is basically a lost cause, and MacArthur is now he's being seen as a symbol of resistance. because you have to. Most of the places where Americans are in the Pacific are already defeated. We're looking at places like Wake, Guam and such. But MacArthur's still in the fight, and this is the only real fight that's going on right now between America and Japan.
And
So
I guess this, since it's also reaching the time where Abdacom was formed
yeah,
among like land force generals, he's literally by rank the senior most active, right?
yeah. After him is De Potten over in the Dutch East Indies, who's about to get the shit kicked out of him. But yeah, it's MacArthur for now, and MacArthur is the only face of the American military in the Pacific at that time. And this is another reason, alongside this council he's made to do press releases for him, that it bombasts him to be like the face of the Pacific War in many ways. Kind of just got thrusted. It got thrusted upon him in many ways. MacArthur actually responded to FDR of this quote: "I have not the slightest intention in the world of surrendering or capitulating the Philippine element of my command. There has never been the slightest wavering amongst the troops." So, in the typical fashion, he's exaggerating. The reality is that his men are riddled with dysentery and malaria. They're starving on half rations. Some of them don't have proper uniforms, like the sailors, and they're still there holding the line. So they're earning the nickname they get, which is the battling bastards of Bataan. Unfortunately, as we had mentioned just a bit previously before this, the Japanese are now going to be conducting some amphibious assaults. And things are going to change. They are going to... It's not going to go as well for the Japanese, but yeah, it's going to be pretty fun. So on the morning of January the 23rd, 300 Japanese soldiers landed, began advancing towards what is known as Logoshokan Point. Now, if you look at the map, sorry, I have to pull up the map down here. They landed far too south of where they were supposed to be. So we're looking at what it says Luzon Point and Quinanin Point. Whoop, get my notes back. Despite their best efforts, the Japanese maintained their beachhead firmly under intense artillery and mortar bombardment. As soon as they landed, they were attacked by the coffee-stained sailors I had mentioned and some Marine commanders that were hastily put together with a few soldiers. Meanwhile, the defenders were striving to eject the Japanese from the Logoshokan Point. 600 more Japanese successfully infiltrated the Quinanin Point. That's just about 7 miles to its north. A stalemate soon ensued between the Japanese and the mismatched force of 550 defenders, comprised of Air Force Pursuit Squadron guys, interceptor commanders, some Filipino constabulary, so it's policemen, and sailors. Given the circumstances, it was not surprising that progress in dislodging the Japanese infiltrators was quite minimal. By the night of January the 26th, Kimura sent a reserve battalion for Olongapow to bolster their numbers. However, rough seas and possibly some really bad weather caused their landing crafts to veer off course, depositing them even further off Quinanin Point at a place called Anyasan Point. Just want to see, is it on the map? No, it's between Kabobo Point and Quinanin Point, though, is where they were landing. So these guys are not supposed to be landed here. This is kind of a catastrophe for the Japanese, but it's also a big surprise for the Allies, as they're just throwing whoever's nearest to try and fight these guys off. No.
So it's just confusion and demoralization for both in a way.
Yeah, and this begins what is known as the Battle of the Points. Homa decided to appoint Lieutenant General Meiroka Suzumu to launch an offensive against Wainwright's western sector. He assigned him 2 battalions and an engineer regiment. Meiroka's men began a series of night attacks along the Orien-Bagak line. Maybe I'll just a little bit further north in the map here. And when I'm referring to night attacks, it's pretty harrowing stuff. So you got to imagine yourself as a Filipino-American defender. You're in a foxhole. It's the dead of night, and you just hear some rustling in the bushes. Do you call out something like, "Hey, who's there?" Perhaps, a code word? What happens if you receive an English response? Could be a Japanese guy who's just speaking English to you, and he
Not to
also jumps
mention
into
in
the foxhole.
that environment, right? Like you've already been under stress, fewer rations.
Oh yeah.
It's demo, and not to mention you literally retreated like hundreds of kilometers in the past few weeks and months.
Yeah.
It's not really going to be a pleasant experience.
Yeah. So you have to imagine you're in your foxhole, you're expecting a buddy to come over, and it's a Japanese guy with a bayonet, and he's about to stab you. So during these night assaults, a lot of friendly fire incidents occur. If anyone's seen the famous HBO series The Pacific, it's just like the Guadalcanal scenes you see in that one. After about 3 days of these nightly engagements, a few incursions yielded some successes for the Japanese. A breach in the defensive line established itself in 2 locations, but fortunately the defenders managed to bog down further Japanese advances, creating stalemates. On the 29th, the Philippine scouts, supported by some tanks, successfully dislodged the Japanese from Logoscoan Point. So again, that's the one that's indicated as Luzon Point. Although the 2 other points remained under Japanese control, Marivels could breathe a little easier because they didn't arrive at Marivels. They screwed this up immensely. Now, at Logoscoan Point, the sailors and Marines probed the Japanese beachhead, but their disorganization yielded no results. Lieutenant William Hogabum, who commanded forces there, reported this: "We could not hope to continue the attack or even hold our ground, with the troops at our disposal." Following their probing attacks on the 26th, Hogabum and his men were ordered to dig in and prepare for another offensive. MacArthur then sent the 2nd Battalion of the 88th Field Artillery from the Philippine Scouts, who had been withdrawing from the old Abucay line, to target the western coast and help dislodge the Japanese from the points. One battery targeted Logoscoan, while another hit Quezon. When reports indicated that the Japanese were sending additional landing reinforcements, MacArthur ordered Wainwright on the 27th to clear the points as soon as possible. Consequently, Wainwright dispatched troops from the 57th Infantry to Logoscoan and from the 45th to Quezon. Meanwhile, back in Corregidor, the crew of Battery Geary, armed with 8 12-inch motors, received orders to bombard Logoscoan at midnight. They would fire about 670-pound land-attacking projectiles at a range of 12,000 yards. One Japanese soldier who was involved had this to say: "We were terrified. We could not see where the big shells or the bombs were coming from. They seemed to be falling from the sky. Before I was wounded, my head was spinning. Did not know what to do. Some of my companions jumped off the cliff to try and escape the terrible fire." The bombardment was devastating. An observer on Mount Picat noted that the fires at Logoscoan Point were so intense that they could no longer see the target. Despite this aerial support and defenders attacking on the Japanese beachhead, it still all failed. But Wainwright's reinforcements soon arrived at the scene. The following day, they targeted Logoscoan Point with heavy guns from Corregidor, in addition to even more motors, launching an hour-long barrage. And although the defenders attacked once more, they initially met with limited success. However, as additional forces from the 57th Infantry arrived, they began to reclaim ground, and by nightfall, 2/3 of Logoscoan Point had been secured. It would, however, take several more days and assistance of armored vehicles to attack and finally clear out the Japanese from the position. About 300 Japanese soldiers were killed, while the Allies would suffer 22 deaths and 66 wounded. Honestly, a colossal failure on Homa's part. This was a really stupid amphibious assault, and it goes to show the Japanese were not proficient at amphibious assaults.
And most of their amphibious assaults just hoping you hop onto a barge and just land on the beach with surprise.
Yeah, little to no other thoughts. They never had time to specialize, never had time to really train for it. Now, while the Logoscoan Point was, successfully cleared, the battle would continue, 7 miles away at Quezon. By the 27th, a stalemate had developed between the 600 Japanese and the 550 assembled defenders there. On the 28th, Wainwright's reinforcements, about 500 men, arrived, and they quickly took action, but they found themselves digging in once again amidst another stalemate. Several days of continuous probing were limited, only gradually pushing the Japanese further towards the sea at a severe cost. They were losing about 50% casualties. Facing this dire situation, MacArthur deployed the 192nd Tank Battalion from the west coast, and within 2 hours, a platoon comprising 3 tanks emerged. Upon encountering the disorganized defenders, Captain Dice reported this. Excuse me. "We found that the scouts had occupied 50 yards more of high jungle above the bay, at a terrible cost to themselves. Their casualties had run about 50%. The sight and stench of death was everywhere." The attack continued, forcing the Japanese into a 100 by 50 yard area on the edge of a cliff. Not fun for the Japanese, I'd say. As the assault pressed on, Japanese soldiers began to tear off their own uniforms and leap off the cliff, while others attempted to climb down. Yet even then, they were not finished. Some managed to find refuge in some caves within the cliff, And it would take an Allied gunboat to come over and shell these caves before, some engineers using ropes would put explosives into the entrances and blow them up. So, yeah, it would take until apparently February the 8th to eliminate all of them. Yeah. Meanwhile, back over at the Orient-Bagac line, General Nara's 65th Summer Brigade grew weary from the ongoing fighting, but they persisted in attempts to penetrate the eastern sector of the line. Just want to make sure my map, it's in a good position right now. Each assault ended in failure, compounded by unsuccessful landings on the western coast. Overall, Homa had lost 2 infantry battalions, and he could not afford to lose more. To the west, General Miroka commanded the 16th Division, and he received orders to target Wainwright's 1st Corps on the 26th. Similar to the previous actions at the Abucay line, the Japanese began...
Would you say by this point, Homa's career is practically over?
Oh, yeah. His career was over, I'd say, about a week into the Battle of Bataan.
Fair enough.
Yeah, his superiors were going to get rid of him. But, like in any... If you look at the military situation in North Africa during that campaign, it was kind of like with the British. They would see what commanders were aggressive, did well, what commanders were like, lame ducks, shuffle them to another place, right? They would probably be like, Homa, you're going to go to Manchuria or something. So, yeah.
You mean like a certain General Neil Ritchie?
Exactly.
I mean, but yeah, I get it. And I think one thing I found very interesting is a lot of issues in high command never even employ the dimension of military competence. It's just your personal likes and dislikes that make the decision.
For the Axis, yes. For the Allies, not so much. Although, for the British...
Okay, let's just put it like this. Between the British and Americans, any friction that was tossed up wasn't really due to different nationalities or anything. It was just like the guys just did not like each other.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, things aren't going too well for Homa. The 1st Division, having lost substantial equipment and remaining disorganized from the retreat, was still in the midst of preparing its defenses when all of a sudden they were attacked by Colonel Yoshioka's 20th Infantry. His men seized a formidable position that would allow them to push into the Allied line throughout the night. Before long, Yoshioka's 2,000 soldiers had split into 2 groups. One company took up a position on a hill 400 yards beyond the Allied defensive line, which became known as the Little Pocket. And at this point, because we're entering a new battle, I just want to bring up a new map. Yeah, here's... Okay. I'll keep it this size for now. So yeah, known as Little Pocket. The other company moved east along Trail 7, going further south, nearly a mile behind the Allied defensive positions, establishing a site that could block the north-south traffic along Trails 7 and 5, which would hinder the Allied troop movements. This one was dubbed the Big Pocket. Thus began what was known as the Battle of the Pockets. The Allies had no way of knowing the size of the Japanese forces within the Big Pocket. Consequently, Colonel Townsend dispatched 2 reserve companies from the 11th Infantry on January the 29th to clear the area, quickly discovering that the Japanese presence was not insignificant. Townsend immediately called for reinforcements. Soon, the 1st Battalion of the 45th Infantry arrived and they attacked the Japanese from the south, while the 11th Infantry targeted them from the north. Despite their efforts, the Japanese held firm. They dug in, while the Allied artillery failed to dislodge the defenders within the Big Pocket. Both the small and big pockets were encircled and they were cut off from supplies, leaving the Japanese troops in quite a dire situation. General Morioka attempted to do airdrop supplies, but didn't really do well. The parachute pack simply fell into the hands of the starving Filipino and American soldiers, which is ironic given that this is usually the other way around, where the Japanese are scrambling to steal parachute supplies. Yeah. Morioka realized he needed to break through the defensive lines to reach the pockets and save his trapped men. By February the 6th, Morioka received reinforcements, and these were 2 battalions from Manila. Armed with this additional strength, he launched an attack shortly after midnight. His forces advanced down Trail 7, overrunning a platoon of the 11th Infantry, killing about 18 of the 29 men in their foxholes. It seemed like he was gaining ground, and he pushed further south, but the 11th Infantry quickly reorganized themselves, and they contained him, halting the Japanese advance just 800 yards from the Big Pocket. While Morioka attempted to intensify his efforts to reach the pockets, Wainwright began deploying additional forces against the Japanese. On February the 2nd, he attempted to utilize tanks for the assault on the pockets, but he lost a tank in the process and made little progress against the big pocket. The following day, similar results with additional tank losses. It was also on this day that Lieutenant Willibald Bianchi, leading a platoon against 2 Japanese machine gun positions, sustained a wound to his left hand. Refusing medical attention, he continued firing his pistol before throwing a grenade that took out one of the machine guns, earning him 2 bullets in his chest for his bravery. After that, he climbed on top of a damaged tank, and he fired its anti-aircraft gun into the enemy position, only to be knocked back by the recoil. Bianchi survived the ordeal, ended up in a hospital for a month, and then he would later return to his unit, being awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroism. And it is rare to survive getting a Medal of Honor. Yeah.
I think like the only famous recipient I know of the Battle of Honor that survived also was Mitchell Page
Yeah.
from Guadalcanal.
By the way, if anyone's interested in Medal of Honors, I did a whole documentary with Dave Holland talking about all the medals of honor earned on Guadalcanal, excluding the Air Forces. I think we covered all the Navy ones too. We did all the ground forces for sure, both Army and Marines. Very interesting episode, and Dave knows all the locations of where these were earned. He walks Guadalcanal himself to do so. Now, by the morning of February the 8th, the forces were closing in, and they discovered only Japanese corpses and discarded equipment. It appeared that the Japanese had actually escaped during the night. Unfortunately, for the escapees from the Little Pocket, they ran directly into Allied forces positioned in a horseshoe formation. They were given the opportunity to surrender, but they responded with gunfire, leading to their annihilation. With the Little Pocket cleared, General Jones concentrated all of his forces on the Big Pocket. Learning of the Little Pocket's fall, Yoshioka prepared a breakaway strategy for the Big Pocket. Jones' forces began to tighten their encirclement, while Yoshioka's men desperately sought the weakest point in the blockade. Eventually, to the northeast of the encirclement lay dense jungle, where Yoshioka's troops had been subsisting on horse flesh and tree sap for many days. They're half-starved and suffering from weeks of continuous combat before they would make their breakthrough. About 100 of Yoshioka's soldiers were wounded and in need of assistance, however. By February the 11th, Filipino forces had successfully pushed into the Big Pocket. General Jones later would reflect, "It was quite obvious that the end was in sight." The Allies were still unaware that Yoshioka's men had commenced a withdrawal northward, where openings in the defenses might allow them to escape. On that same day, General Jones suffered from dysentery, and he had to be evacuated. Colonel MacDonald, his chief of staff, took command until General Broder assumed leadership on the 12th. However, by then the fighting was nearing its conclusion, and hundreds of Japanese were found dead inside the Big Pocket. By the morning of February the 15th, Yoshioka and 377 of his men managed to break through the Allied defensive line, making their way back over to the Japanese forces within 4 days. Homa, having missed his 50-day campaign target, saw 3 battalions effectively annihilated. He was humiliated, and he would be forced to order a retreat several miles further back on February the 22nd. To add insult to injury, Homa had to request reinforcements from Tokyo. It seemed that the battling bastards of Bataan had dealt the Empire of Japan a bloody nose. And that's actually here that I think I'd like to stop the episode, because it would be far too long to go through what is the rest of it and the end of the Battle of Bataan.
Not to mention, we might also want to consider the assault on Corregidor, or would that be also a separate episode?
Because I want to include the Death March, because you have to.
All right, then probably we are looking at 2 more episodes for the series.
Yeah, it's probably going to be 2 more, because we are going to be covering Corregidor in depth, because no one talks about the assault on Corregidor. It always seems to be, they reached the end of Bataan, and yeah, Corregidor, it was like the next day it was gone. It's not really what happened. There was a defense at Corregidor, and I think it should be covered. But before I let the audience go, please, if you'd like to further support this channel, consider checking out the YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/PacificWarChannel. By joining this, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. It's almost 30 episodes at this point. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Thank you for being a good hostage, Gaurav. And we got to... Yep.
No, I was just saying my
We have a
pleasure.
few more episodes to go.
Yeah.
Sorry, we stopped each other twice there. My bad. But we're going to be covering this campaign to its fullest. And, well, we're going to be opening up a brand new campaign soon. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be pretty extensive.
And
But yeah.
And not to mention, we have some series also planned that we want to take off. We're going back in time for that.
Yep. So until next time, bye, everyone.